Hey everyone, so in this video I'm going to be referencing an article. This one's of the Post Millennial, and it's being submitted by Brad Betters with a headline, Bernie's immigration policy is backed by his libertarian ideals. Like I said, folks, the main reason why I support Maxime Bernier and the People's Party of Canada is not that I think that politics is the end-all be-all. Actually, I think you have to greatly shift and affect culture before you can even contemplate or comprehend transferring that into the political realm. Like I say, politicians, if you leave them to do things in their own fruition or rely on what they think is best, well, it's always going to come down to picking winners or losers. And that's not fair for anyone. Well, unless you're one of the people that they pick as the winner. I'm all about the free market or freedom and competition, because competition is what raises and elevates us. Whether you're talking about moral or ethical competition, or in your personal social lives, or in the economic realm. At the end of the day, it's individual liberty that matters most, and the respect of the sovereignty of each individual. If you've got a healthy culture of people that respect individual rights, freedoms, and their sovereignty, well, the politics or the political parties should ultimately reflect that. But if you look out there today, that is definitely not a reality as far as the citizenry or even the political class that represent them. Today, it seems to be an era and an atmosphere filled with a lot of collectivists that are seeking to use government, that big gigantic gun in the room, as the ultimate means to their end. Whether it's to benefit them, like I say, in the social realm or the economic realm. And that's a game that, well, first of all, it's a race to that lowest common denominator, which, trust me, at the end of the day, if we ever get to that point, you're going to realize, I don't want to be here. And it's a real bad place to put millions of people into. Because when you have ultimately tens of millions of people down there, that lowest common denominator, well, if there's nothing else for them to look for as far as elevating themselves, if they realize that they're mired down to this lowest common denominator, well, the only thing they've got to do is fight amongst each other and compete for that very finite space. Like I've said so many times in the past, folks, libertarianism, the respect and the philosophy of individual liberty, that is the future. That is actually truly, even if you're a progressive, that is truly how the human experience will evolve at some point in time, is to get ultimately to the point where we respect and acknowledge the fact that we're all sovereign individuals and we should be treated as such. Some of us were already there. Most of our peers, no, not even close. But I'm trying, and lots of us are out here trying every day to get more and more people up to speed and on our level. While there are many patterns of abuse in the mass media's everyday coverage of Maxime Bernier, i.e. the constant comparison to Donald Trump, the failure to actually engage with his policies, quoting those who accuse him of pandering while failing to quote his supporters, although there is the occasional exception. One that jumps out is the routine questioning of his ideological bona fides. Being ideologically inconsistent is a serious charge for many among Bernier's base. While not a concern for liberals and progressives, they just want power and results, it is for many conservatives, even if it means becoming beautiful losers, as one U.S. conservative commenter put it years back. Recently, the National Post's John Iveson referred to Bernier's party, the People's Party of Canada, PPC, as being plagued by a fundamental contradiction in that it's led by a libertarian free marketer and supported by anti-globalists. Although vague, Iveson is no doubt at least in part referring to the PPC's call to reduce immigration levels. His Post colleague Stuart Thompson was more express, calling Bernier's immigration position a diversion from his ideological playbook, a criticism repeated by Global News West Block host Mercedes Stephenson, among others. In calling to reduce immigration, Bernier is being perfectly faithful to free market thought. Importing workers from abroad, if high enough, can lead to supply shocks in the domestic labor market, weighing down and distorting wage rates in the process. Indeed, economists are mystified why wages in Canada have flatlined despite years of growing GDP. For large employers, these expansions can lead to giant windfalls and a chance to avoid facing market discipline, i.e. by not innovating or offering the wages needed to draw in new workers. Markets which are expanded artificially are not free, and profits pumped up with the help of government we usually call subsidies, two things free marketer libertarians revile. Equally reviled among libertarians is big government, something that goes hand in hand with mass immigration. Large populations with diverse languages, cultures, and religions serve as a perfect excuse for new government programs and bureaucratic meddling. From government-funded language instruction, translators, and signage to more housing and educational and job training initiatives for unprepared newcomers. Overlaying all this is the array of government watchdogs mandated to ensure immigrating visible minorities get their requisite, i.e. ever-increasing, amount of cultural sensitivity and achieve economic parity with old-stock Canadians. Then there's immigrants' access to existing programs such as social safety net payments, welfare, unemployment, food stamps, etc., a topic famously raised by the father of modern libertarianism, Milton Friedman, who said, "It is one thing to have free immigration to jobs. It is another thing to have free immigration to welfare. You cannot have both. Free immigration would mean a reduction of everyone to the same uniform level. It would go in that direction. It is that perception that leads people to adopt what first seems like inconsistent values." And just as seemingly inconsistent on this point was the other libertarian founding father, Murray Rothbard. Both men also agreed on the importance of the so-called meta market, or the cultural prerequisites and shared trust needed to ensure that a free market system is even possible. As for libertarian political leaders Nigel Farage in the UK and Ron Paul in the US, they consistently pursued policies including immigration reduction in the name of the national, not the global interests. What they championed, as one could also say of Friedman and Rothbard, was, to borrow a phrase from libertarian columnist Justin Raimondo, a libertarianism in one country. That is, a libertarianism that holds national self-determination, including the right for citizens to choose who and how many outsiders can join their communities, as sacrosanct. In this vein, they consistently viewed globalist bodies such as the European Union with its Schengen Agreement or the United Nations with its Global Compact of Migration with skepticism and as a restraint on national independence generally. What Iveson and co. might be failing to appreciate is the difference between libertarians and what the Americans call libertarians, those who are pro-free market yet globalist and pro-open borders in outlook. These types see no difference between importing people and widgets or having open markets for both the world's labor and its capital. It's a debate too fraught to get into here that's been rollicking conservative circles in the U.S. for decades. But even if Iveson and co. were right, shouldn't they praise, not deride, Bernier for being flexible? And how about for being responsive to voters? Because current immigration rates are at or near record levels. Frank Graves of Ecos Research calling it forefront issue this election year, and yet it's barely being discussed by the other parties. Meanwhile, polling firm Angus Reid shows supporters of an immigration reduction versus an expansion are in the majority by over 8-1, and yet every party except Bernier's PPC wants to see an increase. Even if Iveson and co. are right, and there's no such thing as a free market anti-globalist, what's worse for voters? A politician who's inconsistent or indifferent? Nice little article by Brad Bitters, and gives you something to think and ponder on. Like I say, I'm always willing to promote and help other people out there. That's why I like seeing these upstarts, such as the Post-Millennial or Spencer Fernando. Like I say, it's nice to see that there are Canadians out there, are people that are contributing to the political discourse, that are offering counter opinions or narratives, so that at the very least, it gives Canadians something to actually think about. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, and I wish more Canadians would adopt this, is just don't react immediately. Let this stuff absorb, right? Like absorb it. Think about what's being said. Give it the respect that it rightfully deserves, right? This when you're talking about philosophy or big picture policies as far as how we cohabitate and coexist or commingle with each other, you really have to put a little bit of thought, at least, I should say a lot of thought, but some nuanced thought into these things, which, like I say, it's nice to see that people from the post-millennial are doing that to help get a lot of Canadians up to speed and informed, because I recognize that the establishment media and the academic and the ruling class have been failing them tremendously. So like I say, I don't want you to always be just listening to what I got to say. That's why I actually cover people that even disagree with me on some areas, some regards, and I praise and support them and promote them for doing what they're doing. Even if I don't actually agree with everything they say, I'm always willing to help and support and promote other people, because like I say, to me, that's the best thing. That's the best possible scenario that I can hope for is at least give people some good, constructive dialogues and narratives so that they can at least determine and decipher who's being truthful and honest with them and who's trying to take political advantage of them. Because I think if you give them that area, like not everyone's going to be as intelligent as each other. Like I said, there are definitely discrepancies as far as, you know, the population of Canada. There's some intelligent people, there's some less than intelligent people, and there's a whole lot of people in between. But at the very least, if you give all those people, regardless of their intellectual capacity, their IQ, or their competence level, at least if you give them some kind of consistent message where you're willing to give a lot of people the ability to say what they have to say, but at the end of the day, we should all sit down and discuss these topics. At the very least, they'll realize that the people that are doing that, well, those are the people that aren't trying to impose themselves on each other or on others. They're just trying to figure out a best practice or a best method so that's more conducive for everyone to be free from forced subjugation, slavery, or coercion, or theft. So if everyone, like I say, we don't have to agree with each other, but at the end of the day, if we all at least acknowledge that there are some people that are at least proponents of respecting each other's individual sovereignty and their individual rights and freedom, then at least we know that we're functioning from the realm where we can continue the conversation going forward. The people that play identity politics or this divisive type narratives where it tries to pit us against each other or force us away from each other and having resentment and hatred as the basis in how we perceive each other, that's not going to work. Like I say, the only way this is going to work, the only way we're ever going to advance forward as a country, as a nation, is if we finally get to the point where we can accept that you can do your thing and I can do my thing. At the end of the day, we just got to get back to the basics as far as libertarian principles and the philosophy of liberty. Just respect yourself as a sovereign individual and respect me as a sovereign individual and hold each other to particular standards as far as moral philosophy or even legal terms as far as like don't use preemptive force, violence, coercion, theft, you know, the things that we all expect and hold dear to our heart for the most part. Those stuff actually I think we can get to quite easily. But we're never going to get that point until the ones out there that have the dominant voices are people like this contributor to the Post Millennial who's trying to be reasonable and trying to bring us together to talk about these things and start rejecting some of those in the established media or the ruling class that wants to keep us divided and further apart. Once libertarians or classical liberals or independents or even some of the small government conservatives, once we actually have a dominant voice, then things will start to unfold in a much more conducive manner as far as respecting each other as individuals. But as long as the collectivists, as long as the authoritarians have the dominant sway or the dominant influence in our, whether it's social media or established media or through our institutions or educational systems, well, as long as they maintain their power to divide us, well, we're never going to get that point, which is why, like I say, I hope more and more Canadians will start joining with us rather than playing this identity politics game where they got to support their team. If we can get to the point where we treat each other as individuals and respect each other as individuals, you'll see a lot of the problems that seem to be very much dominating the political discourse today, they'll seemingly dissolve. And you'll realize that, well, that was pretty easy, and yeah, it will be. But only if you reject the rhetoric and the divisive narratives that the collectivists, that the authoritarian among us are using to predominantly keep you confused and confounded. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.